Hey guys, I'm here to present my individual differences study. The title of this article is Declarative and Procedural Memory as Individual Differences in Second Language Acquisition. The statement of the problem is that previously there's been a study done on the relationship between declarative and procedural memory and also L2 proficiency at different stages. However, it's only been done once before by an author named Carpenter, and there were a lot of questions at the end of their study. But before we go any further, we should stop. Hammer time. No, we're going to stop and define what declarative and procedural memory are. So declarative memory has to do with semantics like facts or events, which is known as episodic memory. So you're able to recall things off of the top of your head. And declarative memory can occur pretty quickly, and usually after one exposure, those quick facts are stuck in your brain. And declarative memory really benefits from the intention to learn. In language, it is associated with the mental lexicon, so knowing sounds and knowing certain vocabulary words. And it can also be associated when you are learning grammar rule chunks and just that memorization aspect of it. Now, the procedural memory has to do with your cognitive and motor skills and also your habits to learn. And this occurs gradually with repeated exposure or experience. Doesn't come very quickly to any individual. And it can occur even without the intention of learning. And in language, it has to do with mental grammar, so knowing how to syntactically put sentences together, how to use the correct verb tense, so on and so forth. And you can see through this picture that declarative and procedural memories, they are produced in different parts of your brain, which I found pretty interesting. The research question that is posed by the authors actually is two-part. The first question is there a relationship between declarative learning ability and L2 grammatical development at early and or late stages of acquisition? The same question is applied to procedural learning ability. And the second research question is, will declarative and procedural learning ability predict L2 grammatical development at early and late stages of acquisition? The main constructs, like all of our presentations for this section, is that individual differences affect second language learning. In this article in particular, it talks about the individual differences of declarative and procedural knowledge. So the participants that were involved in this study, there were 14 in total, almost 50-50 female and male. They were all right-handed, they were healthy, they were between the ages of 18 and 30. They were either enrolled in college or they already obtained their bachelor's in a non-language field. They had one native language, which was English, and they had an IQ higher than 95. And throughout this experiment that they did, they learned an artificial language called Brocanto 2. So over a period of 2 weeks, these participants were involved in 7 sessions. The first session was a cognitive test session, which lasted about 3 hours. Here, the participants were given an IQ test. They were tested on their declarative and procedural learning tasks. They were given background, questionnaires, etc. In sessions 2, 4, 5, and 6, these sessions had to do with language training and practice sessions. Each one on average lasted about 2.6 hours. And this is where the participants were exposed and given opportunity to practice their artificial language in a meaningful context, meaning that they were receiving implicit training, so they were not told exactly what the rules were of the language. They were not told what words meant, but they had to figure it out through a computer-based program. And this was to simulate a natural setting with immersion. So it did not deal with like a classroom-based setting. And further in sessions 3 and 7, these were assessment sessions that lasted about an hour. So the participants completed judgment tasks in which they indicated the acceptability of grammatical and ungrammatical sentences from Brocanto 2, the artificial language. So were they able to distinguish words they had learned from the language, words that weren't a part of that language, etc. So based on these 2 assessment sessions, the participants did indeed learn the artificial language over time, and they also improved over time, showing that there was development. In the session of number 7 of assessment, the participants scored significantly higher than in session 3 when they were first given those judgment tasks. Now with our conclusions, brought back the research questions so that we can really dive into it. So the first question was there a relationship between the learning abilities and L2 grammatical development? And what was found is that declarative memory associated with L2 development led to an early L2 acquisition. And contrastingly, procedural memory was associated with late L2 acquisition. So at the beginning of the study, the participants were mainly focusing on their declarative memory for learning very quickly and rapidly those new words and the new syntax. And later on, after, again, repeated exposure to the language, they were then using their procedural memory for their language acquisition. And with the second question, they were testing to see if the declarative and procedural learning abilities would predict the L2 grammatical development. And what they found was that depending on how good their declarative memory was, that was a good predictor of early L2 acquisition. So throughout this study, they were given different tests to assess their declarative memory, which this was part of session 1 when they were figuring out where is their declarative memory at. So if it was really high, it was a good predictor that early L2 acquisition would be high. The same thing goes for procedural memory. If participants' procedural memory functioned well and highly, it was a good predictor that there would be late L2 acquisition. And this makes sense because there would be, again, repeated exposure over time. There were some limitations, however, in this study. It only tested implicit training, so only for situations that have to do with immersion and not a classroom-based setting. Working memory also was not studied. They were only given one type of assessment. It was a very short time span of 2 weeks, and it was a small sample size. So based on all these limitations, and there was also no use of neuroimaging techniques. So based on all these limitations, it definitely opens the door to more questions and more research in the future. Thanks, guys, for listening. Have a great day.